Arrogance. It's simple arrogance. These people think they're masters of the universe and they've been given a bloody nose. They're sitting in Boston or the Everglades or Denver and they think they can run English football. And they pick the wrong sport.
Hello everyone, I am joined by Henry Winter this afternoon, Chief Football Writer of The Times. Henry, thanks so much for taking the time in what I imagine has been a fairly hectic few days.
It's been a good few days. It's been fantastic to see the response from everyone in football. I don't think even VAR has united everyone in opposition to something as this. I mean, you and your fans have been fantastic. I was at Ellen Road on Monday night and there was a group of your fans there. And the Leeds fans, normally it's fairly tribal. You know what English football's all about. It's all about tribalism. But actually, the unanimity, the collectivity on this has been very uplifting, and not simply amongst the fans, but Jamie Carragher, Gary Neville, ex-players, Jordan Henderson. I thought it was fantastic, but then that doesn't surprise me knowing Jordan. We saw what he did during the pandemic. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold said something as well. And I think for players to do this, going against your paymasters, that is, it's not brave, but I actually felt that it's, they stood up when they needed to, and obviously the manager as well. So, even, the future king of the country and even Boris Johnson, who I can't imagine is too popular in your neck of the woods anyway. I mean, even he, whether it's political reasons or for genuine reasons, even he has stood up to be counted on this one. So, actually, I think I found it fairly uplifting 22 hours.
I must admit, I said I'm probably as tired as I've been, and I've got 2 kids, so I've been very tired for the last 9 years. But I feel quite invigorated at the same time. I feel fatigued yet energetic, because you're right. There's something that's quite. I feel buoyed by that notion. You're right. It's the first time, and we were referring to the fact that 11 years ago when we started this sort of project, Liverpool were under ownership protests. People were gathering outside the ground to protest. But a lot of these platforms that have been used over the last 48 hours simply didn't exist a decade ago. And I think it's been quite encouraging to see, you're right, that unification across football, because it doesn't happen. You're right. I think tribalism's fun, and the reaction between fan base is great. If we all felt the same things, it would be a bit dull, but there are certain issues that should transcend, and this is absolutely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I spent a lot of time going to supporters groups and talking to them all over the country. Obviously, a lot of it is on Zoom at the moment. And one of the things I say to them, possibly in a slightly sort of arrogant way, is that because I was at school in Germany as a kid and, went to, I was unfortunate, I got Bayern Munich's one poor season in their sort of 100-odd year history. But, you look at the sort of German clubs now, and there's strong connections between the supporters groups of each club, and they will absolutely demonstrate on certain things. Look, Liverpool's a very good club, and we, in terms of the supporters, we've seen it on issues with ticket pricing and the furloughing in the past. So that's fantastic. But I've always felt supporters in this country as not as militant, because actually they're more focused on tribalism, the next game, manager, who we're going to sign, and all that. Whereas actually the German fans, whether it's 50+1, whether it's turning their back on the team and the owners if they're unhappy with ticket prices, or simply not turning up, I think they're more militant. So I've often talked to supporters groups, and look, it's easy for journalists to come in and say, well, you should be doing this. But actually, I think what we've seen, the power of all the football supporters combining to fight the enemy within, as you say, has been very uplifting.
Yeah, it's how would you say it's been sort of received today? Because obviously we're far closer to the Liverpool side of things, of course, and a lot of this filters in. It just does. It has to, because of how big it's been. But yeah, how are you feeling this has been generally received? Because I personally did not meet a single person who was for this. So I certainly haven't come across anyone who is upset by the collapse of the Super League.
I was doing an American radio program earlier today, and it was quite interesting. The reaction from there was for some of the people on the program was actually, hang on a sec, this is a really good idea. We're actually talking about Chelsea after the demonstrations last night. Why should a Chelsea fan who lives near the ground be any more important than a Chelsea fan who lives in Miami or Vegas? And my argument to them was, well, Helseth, those Chelsea fans were there during the dark years of hooliganism, when fans were coming out of grounds with sort of darts in their noses, when fans were sort of treated appallingly. And those fans will be there through thick and thin. So I'm going to stand up for these, what the American bankers rather patronizingly called legacy fans. And I think that's highlighted it. And look, I'm very fortunate. I've been going to match after match. I think I've done about 130 odd games behind closed doors in the past year. And if one thing football has learnt in the past year is how vitally important fans are. So for John W. Henry and FSG to not realise the importance of fans. I mean, I don't need to tell you about the work that your fans have been doing, Ian Byrne and people like that with food banks. That's a long-established thing. But Liverpool fans have got a history of sort of rallying to the cause at times of adversity, and they've been fantastic during the pandemic. And at a time when you really wanted to be in Anfield to support the team against Real Madrid. I was there for that game, and an empty cot. There were two stewards on it, whereas normally it would be this heaving mass, as Barcelona found out. And you weren't there for the title to be lifted. I felt for Jordan Henderson, the proudest moment of his life, obviously along with the Champions League, and the supporters weren't there. And that is why these owners, these distant owners, need more dialogue with fans. They need to appreciate more that you are the lifeblood of the club. For John W. Henry to realise that actually what is Anfield? It's bricks and mortar with a really nice lawn, but it's nothing without the fans.
Yeah, no, 100%. I just wonder about this because obviously we talk about the football without fans is nothing, and of course, because if you've got no eyes on your product, there's nothing, you've got nothing to sell. But I do wonder how much of this stems from the pandemic, and obviously financially it stems from the pandemic. But how much maybe people removed, non-lovers of the sport, have looked at it and gone, well, football survive without people in the stands. As long as we've got that audience globally. And is that maybe something the way they go, well, we can get away with this because there's always going to be fans around the globe who are going to buy shirts and they're going to buy memberships and those kind of things?
5 years ago, when the Telegraph put me on gardening leave when I was going to the Times, I decided to write a book on England. It didn't do very well, but then that was probably echoing England at the time. But I went out to see Steven Gerrard in LA just to talk to him about England and the issues and why the so-called golden generation were having issues. They weren't simply delivering as he did say in Istanbul, issues like that. And so I went and talked to him, and I got up early the next morning and went into a very nice pub called the King's Head in Santa Monica. And they opened at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I spent a day there for the book, basically, just finding out why overseas, which was very nice. I was only on coffee. It was honest. It was just to find out the interest, the overseas interest in English football and why. There was Premier League game after Premier League game. Now, like, there were expat fans coming in watching their team and all that, but a lot of the American fans, the locals, were there because they wanted to see the sport, but they wanted to see the spectacle, and you are the spectacle. The supporters, the backdrop, absolutely huge. For that overseas television market, as well as the domestic market, the backdrop, where am I going tonight? Villa Park. So, they want to see a full Holt End. They want to see Jack Grealish standing in front of the Holt End, just sort of getting 15,000 Villa fans sing it. They want that for year upon year. To be honest, I've written this so many times, I'm turning into a cliche when I talk about it, that the fans should get something more back, whether that's in reduced ticket prices or whether that's in easier travel to away games, more away ticket allocations, because you are very much part of, to use one of John W. Henry's phrases, the product. And fans should be reflecting that. So coming back to your central point, absolutely, the whole thing about the Super League was about the overseas television viewer. But that overseas television viewer and those broadcasters want to see Mo Salah. They want to see Trent Alexander-Arnold bombing forward. They want to see Alisson's great saves, but they want to see a full cop, and they want the English fans, local fans in the ground, the match-going fans, the legacy fans, however patronisingly JP Morgan might call you. You are vital.
Yeah. Let's just talk about the Super League and how this kind of comes about over the last sort of few days and what have you. 12 of the 20 teams are announced. There's nothing on how the extra 5 are actually going to gain their place, the merit on which they are placed into this Super League. There's a half-formed logo that looks like it was made in Word art on Windows 95. Yeah. There's a template website that was thrown together by some PR company. There's no trophy. There's nothing there. There's no sense of emotion around it. There's no feel of what it really is. There's no sizzle reel. There's nothing. How is that allowed to go? How are they allowed to go to market with that? Who thought that was a reasonable idea to launch then? And is this just because of UEFA's plans were coming in and they felt pressure to do it then?
I don't buy that. I don't buy that this was all posturing and saber rattling to upset, to sort of almost force UEFA to give them more money, because you knew that wasn't the case the moment they started withdrawing from senior positions in the European Clubs Association and within UEFA itself. That you knew the moment that they scrambled oils all over the place in the UK and in Italy and Spain, and got PR companies, pretty hopeless PR companies, that this was a serious issue. I don't buy that this was just as posturing. Look, Ed Woodward is effectively paid with his job for the miscalculation on this. So I think it's because you've got fundamentally American owners driving this, and their background, their franchises, their sporting interests are in leagues which don't have promotion and relegation. They've never been able to understand this. I mean, I talked to some of my colleagues in the American media, and they still find it absolutely extraordinary. You could spend all this money and then risk going down. And that sentiment is echoed in the boardrooms of the American-owned clubs. So with the pandemic, with the cost of wages and all that, they obviously decided we need to start recouping some more money. And look, with respect to John W. Henry, he didn't grow up with pictures of, I don't know what age he is, with Kenny Dalglish or whoever on his wall growing up in Boston. He probably had pictures of Gordon Gekko or some Wall Street banker or whatever. So that is his background. And this is a battle over the last 72 hours that has been 10, 15 years in the waiting and probably in the making. Particularly from the Glazers, who came in at Manchester United in 2005. I've seen the Glazers close up. They are not a pleasant breed. They are there for the money. And John W. Henry, although he comes over slightly more eloquently and warmly, and whenever I've seen him at Anfield, he looks sort of engaged. I think he just showed his hand in the last 72 hours about what he's really about, and it's dollars.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that certainly, actually, because I think that's actually quite an interesting notion. I get your take on the difference almost. But the thing that astonishes me on this is, and linking it into Henry's apology, when he talks about like this would never have happened without the support of fans, it was never going to be a thing, which reads as incredibly hollow to me, regardless. But if that's the case? How do you launch without any sort of PR? Where was the PR campaign? Why was there no one talking about who was who? You need representatives. Every company on planet Earth has got spokespeople. It can't surely have been the plan is just to let Florentino Perez be the only person to front this up. Why do you think that was? Because it feels to me as though it was it looks like half an idea. In what was ultimately presented.
Arrogance. It's simple arrogance. These people think they're masters of the universe, and they've been given a bloody nose. They're sitting in Boston or the Everglades or Denver, and they think they can run English football. And they pick the wrong sport, to paraphrase a famous sort of Liverpool expression. They pick the wrong group of people. I think John W. Henry, just listening to him, I think he was actually fairly shocked by the intensity of the reaction, not simply from the supporters, but from across the country, from all levels of society, politicians, future monarchs, Coppites, media. I thought Carragher in his column in the Telegraph and his sparring with Gary Neville, I thought that was fantastic television. And you have to remember that in this year in particular, there's been a lot of scrutiny on the bad side of social media, obviously the racist abuse that players get. And we're writing all the time, and you're campaigning, and the players quite rightly are pointing this out to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook that they have to be stronger on these things. But actually, we've seen the good side of social media in the last 72 hours, because I think that, particularly talking to Chelsea fans, that news spread pretty quickly that there were fans gathering outside Stamford Bridge last night. And it wasn't simply Chelsea fans turning up. It was fans who were concerned about the future of English football, the support that, you know, you and I and so many people in this country love. And they turned up to show their support. I think that so much of this has been fought out in a way on social media. I mean, you only got to have a look at JP Morgan's social media feeds to realise that I think half of your mates in Liverpool have been on there and calling them out. So I mean, actually a nod of respect to social media, which rightly takes a lot of criticism for its lax governance.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of Domino's pizza and bottles of pop turning up at the offices of JP Morgan today.
I remember that when Statler and Waldorf, I remember they hit Hicks and Gillette, and I think all their advisors were getting pizzas. Yeah, the Domino.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, the Domino's effect, we call that from now on. I just thought it was crazy, and it's mad. We had a little chat prior to recording about the attitude, and you kind of hinted at it there in terms of Liverpool's owners, and the thing that caught us most by surprise. And look, it sounds silly to sit here and talk about surprise when venture capitalists act like venture capitalists. Like there should be no shock, but the shock, I think, more from Liverpool perspective and fans' perspective, is because I think that the general belief is that Liverpool are quite a well-run football club. As far as things go, in terms of the ownership, in the absence of sugar daddies, in the absence of people who are going to pour endless funds into the club with no hope of return, that Liverpool being a pretty self-sustainable business model, Liverpool getting to a position where they compete, having the right people involved with the club. I'm sure you'll have come up against alongside Tony Barrett many a time down the years, but appointing Tony to the club like a masterstroke, and all these things. When you see it from Manchester United, what I'm driving at was you see it with the Glazers, they've been protesting against the Glazers since day one. And you see how the finances are run of that football club. It's expected. And when you see it from Real Madrid, it's expected. And when you hear it from Barcelona, it's not so much as Madrid, but it's still expected. It blindsided a lot of Liverpool fans, I think, because it's easy to know when it was easy with Hicks and Gillette, because it was obvious, and it had been obvious for a long time that they were shysters, but it didn't. You understand what the kind of point I'm trying to make here? It was hard, I think, to fathom, and that's why I think there's a greater sense of betrayal from Liverpool fans over this, maybe, than the other fans of football clubs.
I think the direction of travel under John W. Henry over the last, was it decade now? I think it's been maybe less than that. I mean, it's been pretty positive. You look at the mess that they inherited. You go into that main stand there, that's been improved. I've been to Kirby, to the training grounds. I know maybe there are one or two issues there, but I think that, I love Melwood. I've been going to Melwood for almost 30 years now. It's just, it is such a special place. But they needed to move, and I can understand that. Look, they've made mistakes along the way, the furloughing, the ticketing, issues like that. But I think on the whole, I see and hear, and I don't live locally, but I see and hear a lot of calls for them to leave. But I think first, who's going to come in? Who is going to pay £3 billion after a pandemic into a sport which, where if they thought they were going to bring a European Super League in, that's not going to happen for a couple of years. So the investors are going to come in and deal with the financial status quo, which at the moment is an issue with players' wages and the pandemic, with fans not having come in. So I can't see John W. Henry selling up. Okay, so the vital thing is that if there are some good people around him, you mentioned Tony Barrett, and I don't know how much access Tony has to John W. Henry or his advisors, but you listen to someone like Tony Barrett. I was fortunate. He was at the Times when I joined. I've got so much time for Tony. He's and a lot of this, people have been saying. I've deliberately, while I've been writing, just made sure I said owners rather than clubs. The 6 clubs, because actually the clubs, in a way, are the innocents in all this. The supporters, the staff, so many staff, good people at the training ground and at the ground, the people who work on the foundation doing amazing things, the players, the work they've been doing, as we've talked about, for food banks and everything like that. These are good people. So the club is not rotten to the core. It's the issue is with the owners, with a couple of individuals. So do you get rid of them, or do you try and re-educate? Can you re-educate venture capitalists? I'm not so sure. But if you're smart, and everyone tells me that John W. Henry is smart, and look, he's made a couple of billion or whatever, so he must be fairly bright. He will think, he will listen, he will. I hope there's some. Look, I can't see 50+1 coming into this country for many reasons. I can't believe that you would have a Tory government would effectively hand over private businesses to supporters. You're not going to go into Sainsbury's and give ownership or share of Sainsbury's to the guy in aisle 7. I just can't see that. But I do think there is an appetite for board representation. And Spirit of Shankly, you obviously know well. I mean, I know Ian Byrne mainly because obviously he's now a distinguished MP and doing amazing work down in Westminster. But the work he's always done, I would always pass and have a chat with him, at the food bank behind the Anfield Road. Someone like him, if he was a board representative, and I think he's on the committee at Spirit of Shankly, so I know he's a busy man, obviously, but if he was occasionally in on board representations, he would be an early warning system to actually say, no, this is stupid. And look, if you're an intelligent businessman, you have to bring the supporters with you if you're going to bring anything through. And that's what the lesson, I hope, for John W. Henry in the last 3 days has been. Communicate, more dialogue. I mean, a club that I cover, like Arsenal, I mean, if you think you're having problems with John W. Henry, talk to your counterparts at Arsenal, because silent Stan Kroenke is worse.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of the point I'm making here, is that's why I think it's so difficult, and there'll be a lot of Liverpool fans. I think the vast majority of us, and particularly local fans, having been so radicalised under the Hicks and Gillett regime, are more than prepared to go back to the barricades if needs be. But I think there'll be a lot of fans, beyond and globally and locally too, won't be able to understand why there's a fight for this, because, as I say, compared to Arsenal, FSG look like Saints compared to the Glazers. Yeah. They look far better in terms of all the issues, and without getting into any sticky legal territory, of course. But several owners of other top football clubs who have been involved in this, some who haven't. The FSG are the lesser of a lot of those evils. But it's going to be a fascinating turn to see what comes next from it. And I suppose that question remains on it of the John W. Henry and FSG. How do you mentioned a couple of ideas there, but do you think it's possible? Do you think it's possible to win back trust in a situation like this? Because that for a start, the Super League is ideologically. I know from Liverpool, but you mentioned it plenty of times. Even from an outside perspective, I'm sure you can recognise that ideologically that would ring a few warning bells for a lot of Liverpudlians, not just Liverpool fans.
Yeah, all fans. No one wants a closed shop. No one wants grassroots clubs to be to close down because all the money is being concentrated at an elite few at the top who don't want anyone else to join their party. No, I think all fans have been fantastic on this. Liverpool fans, as I expected, would be manning the barricades. But in a way, I just hope that John W. Henry, actually, if he's got any sense, if he's got any advisor around him, if he's got 30 seconds on the phone with Tony Barrett or Matt McCann, who are good people, who love the club, who work hard for the club. I've not spoken to them in the last 72 hours because it's kind of like I don't want to intrude on their private grief, but I bet they're absolutely broken because they're so proud about the club and the achievements, particularly in recent years. And to have this wretched own goal thrown at them from on high when it could have been prevented with a 30-second Zoom with Matt McCann or Tony Barrett. That's got to be the way forward. And if you're John W. Henry, and if you're contrition and your mea culpa in that slightly sort of surreal setting, which looked like he was in a crematorium, if he is genuine and COVID permitting, He comes over here and he comes on your program. He goes into the training ground. He looks Jordan Henderson in the eye and says, sorry, I screwed up. Help me get this right. Help me move it forward. He's got to rebuild trust, not just only with supporters, but with the players, with Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp must have been absolutely seething about this, particularly someone who comes from Germany, who has the values that he has. He wouldn't have appreciated something like this. And also, particularly, as he was effectively made to be the scapegoat to actually go and represent the club and actually have to, I'm sure his instinctive feelings are he absolutely hates it. I mean, he said, what did he say? Look, I've talked against this 500 times. So he's got to actually apologise in person, John W. Henry, and sit down with these people and just say, it's not difficult. Okay, as you say, venture capitalists, they want to make money, but you can make money and actually bring people along with you. And actually, if there is more of an emotional connection between the supporters and the management, the ownership of the club, well, actually, maybe those fans will go into the club shop more often. Maybe they'll invest emotionally and financially more in supporting the team. But he's got to come over and he's got to face the music. Kroenke won't, the Glazers won't, but I think John W. Henry should be above those group.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so on that. Can I just get your take on what were your thoughts when you saw the Jordan Henderson's reaction to this?
No surprise at all. I mean, I was fortunate to interview Jordan during lockdown. I think it was just before Christmas. I think he was going for Sports Personality of the Year, so I went up to see him, and I've known Jordan a long time. I know his values. But what he told me at the time, because we were talking a lot about the sort of the year he's had in terms of the title, but also about the pandemic and his reaction to the pandemic and what he did with the players together and sort of getting all the sort of captains on side to raise money for the NHS. And he was talking about, well, I said, have you got any members of your family who have had COVID or whatever? And he started talking very powerfully about his cousin who works frontline NHS up in Sunderland. And he talks. I mean, when Jordan talks, it's like when he plays. It's just, you let the tape run, you experience what he's saying. And he spoke so powerfully about his cousin. One of her jobs was you can't really call it a job. One of her duties, responsibilities in a way, was to have to hold up the iPhone to a dying relative so that they could say goodbye to their family. And so Jordan is a man with a good moral compass. His parents have instilled that in him. He's got that himself, and I think he represents Liverpool in completely the right way. So it's a very long-winded way of coming back to your long and winding road. Coming back to your point is that I wasn't surprised at all, because I know other captains who rang Jordan, and they would during the pandemic when they were doing all the sort of captains and the players together, and one of them said to Jordan, "Where are you?" When they were doing this phone call, he said, "I'm on the treadmill. I want to keep my fitness up, so I'm doing all my core." And this was typical Jordan. He was working hard to stay fit for when football resumed, and yet he was sort of juggling all these captains together. So no, you've got a real leader, and I know how much you appreciate Jordan, and I think he's been properly appreciated as a footballer, better technically than people think. For me, he's a starter for England, let alone as well as a starter for Liverpool. And I just think we need more people like Jordan Henderson and James Milner and Trent Alexander and Virgil van Dijk, people like that in the game. The sport would be a better place, particularly if the owners talk to people like that. This cliche, everyone says, read the room. Why didn't they read the room? Read the dressing room as well. Have a word with Jordan Henderson. Have a word with Trent Alexander-Arnold or his brother Tyler, and people who care about the community, care about the club.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just, Emma, if you don't mind, I kind of want to come on to what sort of comes next here, because, there's a great sense of relief. A battle's been won with this, people celebrating it, but it felt very bittersweet last night. I'll be honest, because, amid all of this, of course, all the focus has been on this terrible Super League idea and the people behind it and the efforts to call it to an end. Meanwhile, UEFA are unveiling their plans for an additional 100 Champions League games. You've got the Conference Leagues going to be starting. Jurgen Klopp referenced this in his interviews. There's plans for the Club World Cup to be a 24-team tournament more regularly, etc., etc. This isn't doesn't end with the Super League, does it?
I mean, I think the fans have won the battle, but not yet the war. They'll be back. As you say, venture capitalists, does what it says on the tin. They're here to make money, and they will be back, and they'll keep going until they get their money. The issue for English football is to try and guide them in the right way, to actually say, have the fans on side, and actually then just do it with dialogue, do it with communication, do it with respect. And I mean, I agree with you on the Champions League thing. I mean, I think probably UEFA probably quite enjoyed having 3 days of focus on the Super League plotters and this new thing coming in. But look, everyone's been raising issues with the Swiss model, Swiss system. I don't like it at all. But in a way, that kind of argument ended the moment it wasn't simply the champions going into the European Cup. So yeah, look, I'm not a fan of that. But if it keeps football together, if it keeps the pyramid in shape, the European pyramid as well as the English domestic pyramid, then that's key, and it's a price to pay.
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you end up morally on the wrong side, and UEFA and FIFA end up with the moral high ground. That should be a pretty obvious warning that you've got something a little bit wrong.
Yeah, completely, particularly with FIFA as well. I mean, the amount of column inches I've written on the joys of FIFA's morality. I just think what this has shown is the power of good values and the fact that there is a strong resistance movement in this country, whether it's led by Jordan Henderson or Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola or Alex Ferguson came out, and I think it's the first time he's ever spoken out against the Glazers, or certainly their ideas. The resistance movement is there on television with Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher. I hope it's there in the printed world that I exist in. It's certainly there in the sort of supporters, fans channels like yours, which have been so important in spreading the message and almost operating like an early warning system for the sort of the ills of the owners. So yeah, I think football's reaction is a good place, and that is so slightly heartening. I'm sorry if you haven't been getting so much sleep, but actually I slept quite well last night actually, because I don't sleep much during the football season anyway. So there's no time, and I think that's what the cricket season was invented for, good snooze. But I just think I've been actually, I don't want to be patronising, but I've actually been really proud of the way that football's responded to these venture capitalists.
Yeah, no, it definitely bodes well. I think it was the first example, particularly in the new media age, where you can see the genuine benefits of people being able to get together. If there's one thing that the pandemic's given us, is greater access to Zoom and Skype, and organising this kind of stuff, certainly. Well, listen, Henry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Much appreciated. And yeah, at some point, I'm sure the adrenaline will wear off, and it will be time for a very big sleep on this. But yeah, maybe in a day or two. But yeah, I imagine there will be a very good documentary about this, I imagine, somewhere down the line.
Wow, there certainly will. It'll have a Wild West theme to it with the Americans involved. But if I can say one final thing before I go, matches without fans. I've been to 130 odd. It is soulless. It is unfortunate to be there in the flesh, and fair play to the players for the intensity that they have been showing, physical intensity, emotional intensity. But without the fans, I mean, John W. Henry really has to know that without fans, the game is nothing.